wanted to emphasize here, because you were talking about form, and as a physicist turned neuroscientist, we always speak about information. Like physicists used to speak about energy, of course, and matter. Then the previous century was all about information. But if we forget about about the prefix, the question of form is still rather mysterious. And your work, as I understand it, concentrates on whence form, where does form come from, and how it maintains itself. And so these are juicy conceptual questions, the question of form and also the question of laws as habits. And they may seem too difficult to discuss, but in a way you also manage to explain them and test them in a way that makes sense. So they are mysterious, but at the same time they're in our everyday life. We see forms all over the place, and we may have even feelings that we can pick the thoughts of other people. I mean, it's our daily life is full of instances where this phenomena may manifest. Another one which we haven't mentioned is terminal lucidity. And these are corners of consciousness, but like when people are about to die and suddenly they remember all of those memories that they couldn't, and they may have had even like impaired cognition at the moment. So these are there's this landscape of anomalies that when you put them together, they're not so anomalous anymore. They're rather familiar to all of us, and at the same time mysterious. And that's what turns me on as a scientist, that one can study these phenomena that are both fascinating and also not so alien, I would say, at least to me.
No. Well, terminal lucidity, as you say, is when people have had Alzheimer's for years and people assume they've lost their memory because the memory traces have been wiped out by brain degeneration, can remember things that they're supposed to have forgotten. Well, how? If it's a tuning system rather than the memories themselves that have been lost, there may be some surge of energy, a last rally, or something may happen that enables them to tune into these memories they couldn't tune into before. It's rather like a damaged TV set. You may not get sounds and pictures, not because the transmissions have stopped, not because there's no longer BBC One or some particular TV channel, but because something's wrong with the set. And possibly, if you give the set a jolt, knock it or something, it might start working again. And so I think this mysterious reappearance of memories is a bit like that. Yeah. Yes, I think that the whole question of form is obviously involved in memory. A lot of memory is to do with recognition of patterns, like when you meet somebody you've met before. You recognize their face and you recognize them. That's you're recognizing the same form. And a lot of memories are about forms, patterns, structures. So I think memories are really, to do with this resonance of form, morphic resonance. And this is a testable hypothesis. If morphic resonance is true, then if a particular animal learns something new, then other similar animals should be able to learn it quicker because they share in the morphic resonance from the first animal. And if hundreds learn it, then it should be even easier because there's much stronger morphic resonance from the past. I think this is going on all the time. A lot of people say that if they do the word puzzle Wordle later in the day, there's a new puzzle every day, they find it easier to solve than if they do it in the morning. And that could be because millions of people have done Wordle and it's made it easier for others to do it. And this is testable. I haven't been able to get hold of the Wordle data from the New York Times, who own Wordle, because they're terrible spoilsports and aren't prepared to look at this question. But there are other word puzzles where this could be tested. It can be tested with experiments with rats learning new tricks, and there's already a lot of evidence that when rats learn a new trick, other rats of the same kind find it easier. And one can also do experiments with model organisms used in biology labs, Cine rhabditis elegans, the nematode worm, and Drosophila melanogaster, the fruit fly. It's possible to develop quite simple experiments for this, and some of them I hope will be done in the near future. So this is eminently testable, this hypothesis, whereas the memory trace theory is turned into something that's become rather untestable, because with every failure they just say, oh, it must be somewhere else.
Yeah.
And there's billions and billions of dollars being spent on this research program. Thousands and thousands of scientists have devoted their entire careers to this, fruitlessly. And I think because they're looking for something that isn't there.
Yes. This would lead us into sociological issues which I love to talk about, and even philosophical, but maybe in wrapping up, I would say that simply by re-asking the question, whatever your question is, a whole fruitful field of inquiry opens, and many times those fields are not explored for various reasons, and you've opened many of those fronts, and I hope people, including myself and others, would join to ask these new questions, which were in a way asked many decades ago, and recover those questions and have the courage and the good fortune to actually be able to look what's going on in there, and offering a kind of pluralism to science. There should be room for many different ways of approaching the very same phenomena, and in a way I think that's all we're asking for, like the possibility to even go to a neuroscience meeting and say, well, my question is whether memories are stored in the brain. Am I allowed to ask that question, or am I going to be immediately dismissed because that makes no sense? And so if we could do science like this, it would be more fun, more creative, and it could change the world, as the title of one of your books. These could be experiments that could change the world.
Well, yes. I mean, if these questions are opened up within institutional science, then I think it would get much more interesting. Right now, I mean, you're a neuroscientist and you go to neuroscience conferences. I don't. But I would guess that if you went to a neuroscience conference and said, are memories stored in the brain, people would look at you blankly. As you said, when one of your colleagues said that's completely unthinkable.
Yeah.
Because if you start from the usual assumption, the mind is nothing but the activity of the brain, where else could memories be but inside the brain? They've got to be in the brain as material structures. It's unthinkable they could be anything else. But that's because they're presupposing a worldview that says there's no memory in nature, there's eternal laws which are everywhere, working all the time, and brains are produced, minds are produced by brains, and nothing but brains and brain activity. If you start with those assumptions, then you make any other alternative unthinkable.
Yes.
So I think I hope for those who are not familiar with these ideas already, that our discussion may help to make them more thinkable. And when they're more thinkable, they're more testable.
Yes.
And when they're tested, and if the results of the test suggest actually there is a resonance across time, this would move to a shift. It would lead us to a shift in thinking that I think would solve many outstanding problems in biology, not only memory, but also many aspects of inheritance that are not explained by genes.
Yes.
I think there's huge fields of science just waiting to be opened up, and I hope it'll happen soon.
Yes. And you've pioneered that path by making these ideas conceivable, then possible, then maybe even plausible and testable. So it's a difficult path to walk, but again, it opens, and not just for science, it opens lots of fields of inquiry about our everyday lives when it comes to perception, which we haven't discussed today, and consciousness and so on. So it's not just for scientists or philosophers, it's something that can be a gift to the whole world if we would study those questions with an open mind.
And I think we'd also find that these questions, as you mentioned, have been discussed for a very long period. Plato and the Neoplatonic tradition of philosophy in the early Christian centuries were discussing how memory works and how memory... This is a very long-standing debate, and so many of these questions are not entirely new, but we can approach them in a new way today thanks to the advances in experimental science.
And in other traditions too. They've been
Absolutely.
said over and over in many other traditions, which we also need to, in a way, recover and bring to our modern understanding. So there's a work of weaving things together too, integration. And that's fascinating. I don't see why we should be scared or reluctant. Well, I see why, because there are all these pressures we haven't discussed. But in any case, it's what we're doing. I think it's an invitation to consider those and enjoy this quest.